Good evening, family. Thank you so much for tuning in to our live program tonight. I promise you that it's going to be a rich blessing to you. And I thank you so much for taking the time to be able to learn about mental health during our HeadSpace program. We have several mental health experts that are with us here tonight and that are going to speak to us about health and about how we can best take care of ourselves overall, but especially during these difficult times of COVID-19 and police brutality. And so we're hoping that this is an opportunity for you to learn, for you to develop new skills, and perhaps learn new practices that you can do to live the life that God wants you to live. If you don't mind, we're going to start with a word of prayer, and then I'm going to give some brief biographies about our friends on the line, and then we'll begin our discussion. Let's pray. God, we thank you so much for the gift of life. It is you that breathe the breath of life into us, and it is you that gives us the life that we live every day. It's also your desire for us to live life and life more abundantly, and life is a beautiful thing. I pray, dear God, that you will clear out the cobwebs in our mind. Allow us to be mentally healthy as well as physically healthy, and allow us to enjoy all of the days that you have given us in the land of the living. Thank you so much for this discussion, for the panelists, and for those who are watching. And we pray in Jesus' name, amen. 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 For all those who are watching from home, we want to encourage you to participate. If you have questions that you would like to ask during this discussion, please feel free to send us a message in the chat box, and we will do our best to take as many questions as we can. We don't make promises that we'll be able to take your questions, but we will do our very best. We have 4 mental health experts here on the line, and I'm going to introduce each and every one of them. First, we have Dr. Natalie Swift. Dr. Natalie Swift is a licensed mental health practitioner. She's a therapist in private practice in Omaha and Lincoln, providing therapeutic services to individuals and behavioral consultation to agencies who serve individuals with developmental disabilities such as autism, spectrum disorder, and intellectual disability. Dr. Swift currently also serves as our Allon Chapel Prayer Coordinator. Thank you so much for being here. I will now move to Lawrence Gardiner. Lawrence Gardiner is the lead therapist and founder and owner of Centered Counseling Services. He takes a person-centered approach to counseling, and he says our goal is to assist clients in becoming experts in all phases of their lives, physically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. He's a good husband, a father of 3, a compulsive chess and Call of Duty player, and a part-time gardener. Thank you so much for being here. We have here Dr. Sonia Gray Belcher, our good friend. And it is a special treat to have you here all the way from the great state of Texas.
Yes.
For nearly 20 years, she has been licensed as a psychologist in Louisiana and Nebraska, and of course in Missouri and now Texas. She has counseled adults experiencing depression, anxiety, ADHD, bipolar disorder, trauma, relationship issues, cultural issues, and low self-esteem. She's counseled students at St. Louis University Medical College, the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Grand Valley State University, and Andrews University, and counsel adults in a private and group practice. She's taught at Union College here in Lincoln, Louisiana Tech University, and Louisiana State University, Shreveport, and presented at churches, women's ministries, and pastors' wives meeting. What a woman of the gospel. I also want to shamelessly plug that she's beginning a private practice in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. That's 760 North Fielder Drive, Arlington, Texas, 76012. and telepsychology for adults who reside in Texas. So if you have friends or family in Texas, you know who to call. Her website is in progress, drsoniagriggbelcher.com. And we also have my good friend Joshua Wosu, clinical psychologist, PhD candidate, Loma Linda University. Josh is currently finishing his internship at Duke University Medical Center, which is our sister school. Emory University in Atlanta. Our sister school is Duke in North Carolina. He will start his postdoc fellowship at the Washington, D.C. VA in September. Thank you so much to all of you for being here. I respect you immensely for the work that you do and for who you are. And we are so grateful and honored to have you to be able to help our church to have good mental health. So we won't waste any more time. Not that the biographies are a waste of time at all, but we will get to it and I will get out of the way. I'm gonna ask the first question of the night to Dr. Natalie Swift, if that's all right. I have a question for you, and our question that we'll begin our discussion with is, how does stress impact us physiologically? You know, we've been dealing with a lot of stress, and we wanna know, how does the stress that we've been dealing with impact us physiologically, or how does it affect both the brain and the body?
Yes, good question. When we are stressed, and I will add, even if it's positive, whether it's positive or negative, the brain is wired to process it similarly. And we didn't discuss really what stress means. So I'm assuming that, we could have a common, maybe some of the other panelists can chime in, but I kind of think of stress as something that the brain and the body feels like this is overwhelming, it's too much, and I may not perceive I'm able to cope with it or deal with it. So when you have a stressor, whether it's positive or negative, the brain and the body is going to kind of deliver a chain reaction, right? And there's going to be a sense of chemical reactions that start running off in the body. That's just how the mind-body works. And it's going to prepare us to kind of either deal with it, face it, and engage it, or it's going to help us to sort of get away with it. So there was a bear that came into your room right now. I would assume, or if it came into my office right now, I would be getting prepared to figure out what I can do to escape out of the situation, because I perceive it as fearful or overwhelming and I can't deal with that. And so there's some chemicals that are going to be released. I got the adrenaline that's going to help my muscles get ready to prepare for that. And then I have some cortisol, that stress hormone, that's going to help me, my body's regulate some functions. So when we have a stressor that happens, in short, your blood pressure is going to start to rise, right? Your heart rate increases, your digestive system is going to start to slow, because it's going to divert some of that energy to try to help us to deal with whatever that stress is. So it's going to be muscle tension. I may start to sweat. I may start to have problems breathing difficulty. Even preparing for the presentation, I noticed my heart's starting to race. I'm starting to have trouble breathing. My thoughts are racing, and that's preparing me. Do I have to make a quick decision in the moment? And if the stressor is really significant, then I may just freeze and not know what to do, because my whole system is encapsulated in this stressor and I'm immobilized. I can't mobilize myself to move forward because it's that frightening to me. But if the stressor is prolonged, like it's chronic, like the COVID, we didn't know how long it was going to stay, and now it's persistent and everlasting, and we're also seeing the racial injustice and the things that surrounding about that. So it's a chronic, acute look. Well, we're chronically looking at these images and hearing the news, and that is difficult for the brain to sort of process on a long period of time. And so when we're constantly experiencing a stressor, we're going to end up being emotionally and physically exhausted. We're going to have problems thinking clearly, problems concentrating, maybe a bit forgetful, maybe even a bit irritable, and maybe not sure why that is. and maybe even some slight depression. I just feel like I just can't get going. I can't focus enough to do my work, and I'm so uncertain about what is happening outside that it causes me to get really self-focused. And so the body over time starts breaking down because it's having a hard time maintaining that level of preparation, maintaining that level of function to prepare you for what it perceives as a threat. But if the threat is long-term, it starts to impact the body in the sense that the body is not able to be as vital to do the functions that it was created to have. So my immune system starts to break down a bit, right? Starting to maybe have headaches. Remember I talked about that heart rate and the blood pressure increase. So now I'm at risk for heart disease. So there's so much, and that's part of the reason why when we talk about tonight, what to do when the body is so stressed, because our body wasn't meant to be stressed for so long, right? It's preparing to deal with that threat, preparing to deal with that stressor. But over a long period of time, the body starts getting weary and the immune system is not able to protect itself as it would. And so we want to be cautious even now when we see certain images. And lots of times we're so psyched about trying to see all the different images in YouTube and flashing. Well, when the brain sees that image, especially as very traumatic, it's like vicarious trauma. The brain is seeing it as if you are being victimized yourself. Why? Because we have mirror neurons that allow us to see and process that as if we were the victim. And so the stress hormones or the stress chemical is similarly as if we were there. And the whole process of our stress in our body begins again. So we want to be careful about how much exposure that we have, listening to it, watching to it, knowing that chronic stress really starts to break our physiological system down. So in a sense, there's a lot more I could say about stress, but I think that captures it in a nutshell on what stress is, chronic stress, our reaction to it, and then we're going to talk about the ways that we can kind of deal with that so it won't have to be persistent no matter what is going on in the
Good, good. Thank you for sharing. Is there anyone else who wanted to try and add to that about how stress affects both the body and the brain and the reactions that we have when we are stressed?
Yeah, I think Natalie hit it right on the head, and I think about what happens to our bodies chronically when we're experiencing that system of wanting to run away or wanting to engage chronically over time, right? And that's why we see some of the health disparities that we see. I think high blood pressure and heart diseases and insomnia, where we just can't sleep at night, or where we respond to stress by eating a lot of different things. We kind of see our physical health deteriorate and get worse because we've been experiencing these stressors for so long. So I think Natalie is right on with her commentary.
I have heard of stress also, or health conditions as a whole, being passed down hereditarily. So you can pass down, high blood pressure or certain forms of cancer and so on and so forth. Is stress something, or trauma something that can also be hereditary? Is that like a lot of the other physical health factors that we have to consider? And if that is the case, is there room to put that in conversation with racism as a whole, and the stress that comes from racism, and whether or not the stress that African Americans or Black people have been dealing with because of racism could be linked to some of the other hereditary issues that we have? Does my question make sense?
Yes. So like even in utero, where the child, if the mom is experiencing a degree of stress, trauma, whatever it is, that's going to pass down to the child. And so that's going to impact the child neurologically and their ability to sort of manage stress, their anxiety and depression. It does right in utero. That's why it's very important to help with that parent, that mom that is experiencing stress, to how do we help that mom cope, because we do have research to know that it will pass. And so if someone is cumulatively experiencing a stress over time, and then of course, if they have a child and that's kind of impacting the utero, there is this is a transgenerational issue, right? In the sense of how the trauma is infecting the development, the emotional and cognitive and physical development of the child. So it is a factor that's impacting the mental health.
And I think it's also important with the idea of stress. It boils down to kind of the serotonin versus adrenaline, right? Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about stress and the fear factor that Dr. Swift was talking about, that is the idea. Is when you're experiencing stress, that adrenaline is constantly pumping in your body. That's what makes you hypervigilant. That's what makes you hypersensitive, and the irritability that she had talked about earlier. So when you're constantly on guard and when you're constantly on edge, I mean, that's kind of what you kind of see in the Black community as a whole, is this sensitivity towards each other sometimes, is that we're under the adrenaline in our body is constantly pumping because of the stress of living in a country where stress it's a part of our daily lives. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, this young man is killed in Minnesota, but that ties me to some lynching that I was studying when I was in college. You know what I'm saying? So every time I see it, that adrenaline starts to pump. And all of a sudden, I got to deal with that adrenaline. So how do I do it? Yeah, you got to get the balance with the serotonin. So whether that be through, exercise or whatever the case may be. But what we're talking about is those chemicals that are being released in our bodies. And for us as human beings that are constantly under that chronic stress that she's talking about, we're having adrenaline released too much in our system. And that's what keeps us very hypervigilant, very much on edge.
I'm going to defend or perhaps give voice to maybe the less medical health experts that may be watching. Can we explain what is serotonin and adrenaline? I know that Dr. Swift talked about it some when she was talking, but can we spend some time unpacking what those things are for those who may not know?
I think the doctors on the panel are way more qualified than I am. I mean, and Natalie, are you going to take that question?
To you, Lawrence. Okay.
Well, how I kind of learned about serotonin was kind of like the way it was explained to me was when my wife had our first son. And it was explained to me as like serotonin is that stuff that makes you love your baby when he's crying 3 o'clock in the morning. If you have too much adrenaline, you might snap and you might just let your baby cry. You're irritable. You don't want to deal with it. But serotonin is that what they call the love chemical in our bodies. It's that thing that allows us to remain calm, I think that's what it's called. It's the love chemical in our body. It keeps us emotionally connecting and nurturing. So when our baby is dealing with colic, and is not sleeping, the mother being able or the father being able to get up and tend and nurture that baby, that's what we call serotonin, the chemicals there. And that serotonin is also being built in the infant when you are nurturing the child. So the child feels love, so it allows that serotonin to be released as well. On the opposite side of the spectrum is the adrenaline. When we don't respond in a nurturing way, the body can release the adrenaline, and that's the stuff that becomes dangerous if you don't intervene soon enough.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you for explaining that. Beautiful, beautiful. We'll now move on to our second question. I'm going to focus our second question towards the Dr. Sonia Gray Belcher.
Oh, sorry.
We're so excited and so happy to have you here. Of course, you are family. The question is, what can we do to stay healthy mentally and emotionally when we have stress? What are some things, some tools that we can give people to put in their toolkit to help people to stay mentally and emotionally healthy?
Well, thank you for having me in, and it's good to see some Allon Chapel people, and it's good to be with you all this evening. As I was thinking about this, I was thinking about boundaries and how to stay healthy mentally and emotionally is really setting up boundaries. And I want to look at it from two aspects, because 2020 has given us two stressors, one on the physical side and then with George Floyd on the emotional side. So I'm going to break it up that way. So I feel as though the whole COVID-19 God gave everybody a timeout. and that was our chance for us to spend more time with God, to study his word, and to really connect with God the way we should, because everything, we were literally in timeout. But while we were in this unstructured time, a lot of us let go of routine. And when we don't have routine, we can become stressed, or we may do things that in a way that will cause stress. For example, when the kids were out of school, they were going to bed late and no one was keeping up with the time. And so we were going to bed late and feeling groggy and not eating on time. And that also causes stress. So it's really important to make sure that you are keeping a regular routine, eating regular meals, getting up and going to bed at the right time, getting plenty of sleep. I think taking regular breaks when people are at home and they're working from home, they forget to take breaks. They just keep working, and then they're burned out, looking at the screen for a prolonged period of time. When you're in an office, you may be interrupted with a coworker, and then that will be your break. But when you're home and you may not have anybody else interrupting you, you will keep going and may experience some burnout. So it's really important for you to know yourself and know what you need. So for some people, if you're morning people, you may want to do the heavier things, the harder task in the morning, and then the lighter things in the afternoon. And if you're a more afternoon person, then you do the lighter things in the morning and the heavier things in the afternoon. If you are doing a task that you know that, I just really don't want to do it, you may need to give yourself maybe a shorter period of time just to get you involved in it. When I worked with some medical students, sometimes it was hard to study 8 hours a day. So I would say to them, well, let's just study for 5 minutes and see how that feels. Or let's just study for 2 minutes. And so set your timer, do 2 minutes, and then pull away and do something else, and then come back to it. So the goal is for you to get started. And taking frequent breaks helps you to stay involved, helps you to stay fresh, helps you to stay motivated. The other thing that we like to do in a mental health field is to tell people to breathe. So we will tell people to engage in breathing activities, because our body needs oxygen, and oxygen will help us to get to a state where we're calmer. So there are several breathing apps and breathing videos on YouTube. Take one of those, look at that, and definitely incorporate it, because it is really important for our body to get the oxygen that we need. When we are stressed, we tend to take shorter breaths, and we don't. When we take deep breaths, then we are able to calm down. For example, a lot of techniques involve counting when you're breathing. So you're inhaling and you're counting up to 4, and then holding your breath for 4 counts, and then exhaling for 4 counts. And that way it gets you to focus on your breathing and to take deeper breaths. On the emotional side, looking at the stress that particularly people of color are experiencing, looking at the video of George Floyd, we are all experiencing grief. where some of us are in shock that this is still happening in 2020. Some of us are angry. Some of us are feeling hopeless. Some of us are feeling really depressed, very emotional and crying. And it's important for us to realize what we're experiencing is grief, and then allow ourselves to experience those feelings. It's important that we will treat this as if we lost someone close to us, because it is an experience that is affecting us as people of color. So it's important for us to allow ourselves to experience these feelings, to express these feelings, and to treat yourself as if you're going through grief. If you feel as though I'm not able to do some of the things that I used to be able to do. I don't have the energy. I don't have the motivation to participate in the things that I used to participate. Give yourself that time. Allow yourself that pass for right now, because it is a very emotionally draining experience that we're all going through. Journaling is a great exercise to engage in. Writing out your feelings, finding an avenue to express yourself is wonderful. Praying, reading some supportive information, anything that will uplift you will be really important at this time. It's important to allow yourself to be connected with other people, connect with friends, connect with family, allow yourself to express yourself to them, but also most importantly, allow yourself to be comforted by them. I think a lot of people feel as though that they have to be strong, they have to get through this on their own. But that is very detrimental, because we need community to help us get through this situation. We need each other to feel as though we are that we have some hope. And sometimes when we are hurting, keep other people away from the we are not allowing ourselves to receive it, because we are keeping ourselves distant from other people. So it's really, really important for us to open ourselves to our community, to people who want to help us, and to encourage us. And then the last thing I want to say is, remember the promises of God. One of the verses that I've been rehearsing is Daniel 12, verse 1, where it says, "At that time, Michael, the great prince who protects your people, will arise. There will be a time of distress such as has not happened from the beginning of nations until then. But at that time, your people, everyone whose name is written in the book, will be delivered."
Amen. Amen. Thank you so much for that. I was trying to interrupt you just a little bit because you broke up for a second. So
Oh, okay.
I was trying to see if I could get you to run it back a little bit, but that's all right. I think that we really understood a lot of what you were saying, and thank you so much for all that great information. Is there anyone else who wants to be in conversation with what she said, wants to piggyback off what she says, wants to add something to the conversation?
I just like what you said about everything. But I appreciate you saying I'm just getting started. When we're in a situation where you're not motivated and you're overwhelmed, the cognitive resource, I told my clients, we're probably operating on a margin of 25% less of what we would be, because there's so much stress that we're having to contend with what we're seeing, but just getting started. So what I do, I have to tell some of my clients, I use like my little sand timers. Let me just get started. I got my 5-minute and my 3-minute and my 10-minute. So if I can just get started in my 10-minute timer and I turn it down, so I'm not focusing on my phone, I can do 10 minutes of a report. I can do it. So the fact that you said it, I'm going to keep using my timers to get me started and motivated to just do it, and it'll be all right. So thanks for that.
Welcome.
Anybody? Thank you. Anybody else want to jump in? So I have a question that is in line with staying healthy mentally and emotionally when we have stress. And this question can be for anyone to respond to. When we are feeling mentally and emotionally stressed, how is going to see a therapist always necessary? How regularly should we see a therapist? Or how do we know if we even need one? How do we know when we are stressed that it would be necessary to go to see a therapy? And what kind of therapist should we look to? Like if we're saying that, we should go see a therapist, then what kind of therapist should we be looking for when we look for a therapist in the same ways that we would be looking for a doctor?
So I think that there's two ways to look at it. One, like if I'm experiencing pain, the way I handle the pain is going to be different than the way you handle the pain. So you may be in excruciating pain and not necessarily have to go to the doctor, or I may go to a doctor for a lesser pain. So it's really up to you what you need. Some people feel like they can talk to a friend and they're fine. But there's some people, they talk to a friend and they keep talking to the friend and they still don't feel like they're getting anywhere. At that point, maybe you need to see a professional. Or maybe your friend may recommend that you see someone because they feel like, I can't say anything else to you. I don't know what else to say. And maybe at that point, you may need a professional. Definitely, if you are contemplating harming yourself or harming someone else, then you definitely need to talk to a professional at that point. The other question that you asked, who should you see? What type of professional should you see? A professional is a mental health professional is someone that you're opening up to about things that you probably have never shared to anyone. So right off the bat, when you meet someone, you need to feel that you're that comfortable with leaving this information with that person. And if you just don't feel comfortable with that person, then seek someone else, because it's better for you to end that relationship and find somebody that you do feel comfortable with sharing information than to keep going and you're just not comfortable because you're not getting the help that you need.
I think oh,
It's okay to try different therapists.
If you feel like you're not, you don't want to see two, three, or four therapists at the same time. You definitely don't want to do that. But if you feel like you're not getting anywhere with your therapist, or your therapist is just not connecting with you or understanding you, definitely see someone else.
Okay. Josh, you were sharing?
yeah, I think the question itself, I would kind of flip it and think about it as not so much whether you need a therapist, but can I benefit from this? I think that if you're having psychological distress, if you're worried, if you're feeling down, if you have a history of experiences that are impacting the way that you're behaving now, or if you want to know yourself better, maybe you're not having a bunch of different issues, but you want to prepare yourself for something. I think that those are all great reasons to seek out therapy. I think the main question isn't so much whether we need it, it's if I want it, what's keeping me from going out and getting it. And I think a lot of times the issue is resources. We don't know who to talk to, or we think I don't have enough money to give towards this. And I think that a lot of those things can be myths, particularly in this time when there's so many resources. It's just a matter of being exposed to them. Like right now, I know that Dr. Sonia was talking about teletherapy being a resource that's available at her clinic. And that's something that is being made available more nationally. And so from the comfort of your home, you don't have to drive into the office and do this thing. You can call someone at your availability and sit in your living room or in your bedroom and talk, or go outside and get what you need or what you'd like to have. So I think more so thinking about it as this is something that could benefit me. What's within my budget? Who do I need to talk to get this thing? Is I think the question that I would be thinking about because I think that everyone can benefit from therapy regardless of your age. I think if you're Black, I have some extreme, I think Black people should get free therapy, honestly, but that's a whole nother conversation. The times we're living in, that's a whole nother conversation. But I do think that everyone can benefit from therapy. And I think that the question that we should be asking ourselves is, why not?
Anybody else?
And can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay, because my internet was having some issues here. I think the standard that we use in our practice is the idea of your normal routine. So you have a normal routine in which you function, and if that routine becomes extremely disrupted, that would be a sign that you should probably seek out therapy. So if you have a normal routine in which you exercise and you go see family members every weekend when you can, and all of a sudden you're not wanting to leave the house. What's up, Marcus?
I think we lost you for a second.
Oh, okay. Am I back?
You're saying, yes, you're back. You're saying that if your routine is interrupted, you can't see family members like you wanted to.
Absolutely. So my normal routine has been disrupted by, ruminating thoughts where you're talking about anxiety. I'm so overwhelmed with anxiety and stress that now all of a sudden I don't want to go to work. I'm calling in sick a little bit more often than I normally do. Family members haven't heard from you like they normally do. Like, this might be some signs that you're going through some mental health issues. And
that you should go see a professional.
You should seek out. I mean, yeah, you should definitely seek out. I know most companies have, I don't remember the acronym, but it's like an EPA where they have some services that you can access. So you can start there, but for the most part, maybe it doesn't work out for you, and then you research what's going on in your community as far as the availability of mental health. But usually you can start in your school or at your employment and just, hey, I need, is there some resources you guys have for me seeking out some mental health? Something's not feeling right with me.
Okay. Thank you. We're going to move on to the next question now. This question is for our good friend, Josh Wosu. Josh, I want to ask, what are the ways that stress impacts us socially? And what can we do to positively influence our interpersonal relationships? We talked about the mental and emotional side, but we want to include the social component because, of course, we want to have healthy relationships.
Sure. Yeah, I think this is a good a good time to even think about how stress impacts us socially. Your question, I immediately thought about Dr. Swift's comments about just the body and what happens, and how our stress hormones, that cortisol in our body, starts to build up and get released chronically, and how my brother was talking about serotonin and how that hormone serves as something to stabilize our mood, and how when we're stressed, it actually can be under-released. And so it can be harder to manage our mood during those times. And so when you think about what happens interpersonally with people, I might be more irritable. I might be shorter. Josh might usually be very patient, but during times like this, Josh doesn't want to talk with with some people. And so we might find ourselves isolating more and withdrawing when we're chronically stressed. We might not be talking with our coworkers and having small talk. We might not feel like code switching or behaving politely or having banter and back and forth with people that we normally do. And the opposite of that could also be true. We might also go out and seek relationships, sometimes unhealthy relationships with people during stress. I was reading an interesting article about grief and how when we're grieving sometimes, I mean, grief is about loss, right? And all of us right now are grieving. During COVID, a lot of us we've all lost a sense of our environment. We don't get to go out and do the things that we're used to doing. We don't get to go out and hang out with people like we usually do. We don't get to gather in our churches and see Pastor so-and-so, Pastor Marcus, and on the pulpit, you know, slapping his hands and seeing the organist or whoever is on it. We don't get to see that in person. And when we're accustomed to that, it can be very hard to accept that things have changed. And that can be really hard on us socially. And so we can go out and seek the relationships that we have with other people in unhealthy ways. That might mean getting into unhealthy romantic relationships. That might mean going to places that are dangerous. That might mean going to unsafe places in order to have those relationships. Maybe I'm supposed to be socially distancing, and I'm going to decide I'm not going to distance because I just really want these relationships, and put ourselves in harm's way. And so those are just some of the ways I'm thinking about right now that are where our stress is impacting us socially. And the second question about how we can positively influence our relationships during this time, I think is a really important question, right? Because we're a bit more limited now. I think what we're doing right now is one example of creativity and how we can still connect. I feel very close to all of you guys right now as we're talking, and I went to undergrad with Marcus, and seeing Marcus's face has given me all these memories of times that we had together, and so that feels good. And relationships are about, and we're social beings. We're human beings that were meant to be connected to people, right? And so finding creative ways to connect with people is important, and taking advantage of technology is an awesome thing. I also think thinking critically about how we're interacting with coworkers during this time is important, particularly those of us that are, if we're Black, if we're African American, we're working with Caucasian colleagues, or maybe not Caucasian, but maybe non-Black colleagues that don't understand what's happening, or maybe they do understand and they're reaching out to us, trying to comfort us. Even that comfort can feel overwhelming and exhausting. Do I have to text all of these people back? They all want to talk and see how I'm doing, and they all are putting pressure on me to teach them about racism or whatever it might be. Responding to stress effectively during this time might look like coming up with a templated text message that you can send to everyone that reaches out to you. Hey, thanks for reaching out. This means a lot. I'm dealing with this in X, Y, and Z. I'll reach out to you if I need anything, thanks. And just copy paste rather than having to build up the courage and this energy to respond to this person. I'm also I'm talking out of personal experience a little bit. But I think that's important to consider, is how can I effectively use my time and mobilize my energy in a way that's not going to make me feel even more stressed out. And so that's one way, is thinking about how am I going to respond to these text messages. Also thinking about, what is it that I want from people? Is this a relationship that I want to maintain? Is this a relationship where the goal of this relationship is we have to work together and there's a task that needs to be completed? Is the function of this relationship really that I want to maintain this relationship at all costs, and I have to put up with what's going on here? I think based on what the goal is, that should determine how we're going to respond effectively. So I think thinking about what's the goal here, what's the long-term goal here, and what's consistent with that. How can I most maximize like my energy and my resources while also like reducing the degree of stress and energy that I'm using here? Finding that balance, I think, is important. And doing that by identifying the goal is a good way to start.
Thank you. I'm also getting undergrad vibes here. This is the round table at the CAF where we had intellectual debates every day. So thank you so much. Is there anyone else who wanted to maybe piggyback on something that Josh said, or also touch on ways that stress impacts us socially and things that we can do to positively influence our relationships?
I just want to say I'm encouraged because I feel like I go to work and I go home, but I'm not socializing. And so I feel like that something needs to change with that, in the sense of being more creative on how I'm reaching out or connecting. I love my job. I love interacting with coworkers, and then I have my church family, but then I wonder, I need to sort of reroute or have more time to engage with my family, maybe through Zoom, or create a special virtual brunch, or do something to sort of connect versus 20-hour work. And then I just feel from your statement, it caused me to think I need to mobilize or do something different to make sure that I have balance and I'm feeding that social need, or I will get burnout before realizing it. So I just wanted to affirm you helped me to think about doing something different with that.
Anybody else?
I just want to add, even with our children, that them being able to socialize in a creative way is really important. The school that our kids attend, they did a end of year, like I forgot how it's called, like a student activities thing where they say the most cheerful or the most studious. And it was probably the first time that the whole school or a lot of the school was on. And initially one child was like, oh, I'm definitely gonna be on it. And another child was like, I'm not gonna be on that. And another child was like, well, whatever. But they ended up all being in the same room and laughing and listening to their friends. And it was really encouraging. And it was interesting to see how much they're missing that connection as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting notion as well. I think it's so important that we continue to put the parents in conversation with everything and how to deal with the children. But also, we might have younger people who are watching who may be thinking about ways that they can continue to grow in their mental health as well. So thank you so much for sharing that perspective. I'm going to pause right here for a second for all of those who are tuning in who may have missed at the beginning. Thank you so much for watching our HeadSpace presentation. We're talking all things mental health. And so we want you to be a part of the conversation. Please feel free to send us a question in the comments or in the chat box, and we'll be sure to take questions. You can ask the panelists questions at any point, as well as making sure to keep the conversation, not the conversations, but the questions rather, focused on the topic of mental health. So we want questions specifically as it pertains to mental health, whether it be how mental health affects us physically, socially, emotionally, spiritually, and the whole 9 yards. I have a follow-up question about how does stress impact us socially and the influence on interpersonal relationships. I know during COVID, of course, we've been social distancing. A lot of people have been working from home and have been isolating or quarantining. During this time, we've also seen increases in the rates of domestic violence. I'm asking if someone can speak to why that might be the case, that we're seeing increased rates of domestic violence, and how we can serve to be allies to those who have been abused, or maybe give a word to someone who's watching who might be a victim of domestic abuse. But also speak to why this is taking place, why the rates are increasing. Is this a product of stress, or is it merely a product of the abusers having proximity to be able to abuse? Are people more triggered in this time and are reacting in ways that are out of character? Or is it just a product of the fact that the abusers are at home, and so they're more likely to abuse because they are spending more time in the home? Anybody want to maybe speak to that?
So I think that you probably missed part of your calling. You probably should have gone to psychology, Pastor. Okay, because I think that, all right, I know. But there's, this question is resonating with me because I was just doing some supervision with one of my graduate interns as she was providing support for a client that's in a domestic violent abusive situation where the spouse hadn't been abusive or had not been abusive physically at all. But within this week became very, very violent, very physically abusive. And so when it's stress triggered, yes, in that close proximity, and there's not the normal coping or the locations or wherever people are able to go and to sort of release that may not be available. And then if they're not already regulating, they have the poor coping, they're not able to have that self-control, and those issues they weren't addressed, it's going to be definitely triggered when there's multiple stressors, environmental. And so I think it's important to inform or educate what are the resources in the community. Just like I was talking to my intern, were we able to do a safety plan? Were we able to connect them to the Women's Center of Advancement in Omaha, or if it were in Lincoln, whether it would be the Friendship Home, or if it was the one on 23rd, not the Friendship Home, the name escaped me, the Voices of Hope. Where can we just making sure that's available? And as a church community, we want to make sure that those links and phone numbers are accessible so people can have access to that. And I think that would be helpful because there are advocates in the community. There's 24-hour hotlines that people are able to call to ensure, just because we're in this situation does not mean that that person has to maintain in fear and be in safety or in harm's way because they're experiencing this, is my two thoughts, my sense. I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts to say to that, because it is a rising issue, especially here, the statistics in Omaha, very, very rising. Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Thank you so much, Dr. Swift. Did anybody else want to touch on it? Or?
Yeah, I think our environment, I think we're both biologically influenced and then environmentally influenced. And I think when you talk about all the different ways that stress impacts us, and then you change the environment on us, and we're locked in a house together in a confined area, used to having the kids gone away for a certain amount of time, and now they're here. And especially depending on, I don't know everyone's living situation, but if you have a not a whole lot of space to yourself, yeah, it can just be really challenging to adapt to this, especially longer term. And so I do think that it makes sense for people to be more on edge. And at the same time, everyone's living situation isn't safe. And so for some people, some people strongly dislike their job, and COVID has been in some ways really nice for them to just be able to be home. Other people, their home is not safe, and they're coming and they're being confined to an area with someone that is not safe at all. And so that can be really challenging. And I think that being aware of some sort of plan for safety, for what you'll do if you feel like you're threatened, is important. Having an idea of people that you can call, and having that short list on your phone, having a idea of places you can go. Maybe there's women's shelters in the area. Maybe there are emergency lines. Maybe there's a family member that or a church member that that you can reach out to. Whatever the case may be, I think having an idea of starting to think of who can I talk to, who can I reach out to if I feel threatened. Do I need to call police? I know that's a scary thing to think about for a lot of us right now. And if I don't call the police, who can I call? I think that there are a number of crisis lines. Let me see, actually. Let me look at crisis lines and then come back to you. But I think that might be something that we can present towards the end of the session, is some numbers for folk to have to call.
Yes, and what we can most certainly do is try and, even if we don't talk about it in this discussion, we can gather some numbers. So we'll send people to the description. Y'all hear that? We're going to check out the description box afterwards.
I love it.
Love it.
I just wanted to add briefly that there's that increase of substance use, so the alcohol or the whatever, and as they're using that, and then that's bringing about a degree of emotions and violence and acting out, and that's coming out to, they're projecting that on their domestic partner, and then that's fueling the reoccurrence of violence in the home. So I had one trauma expert say that the social and emotional consequences that we're experiencing just from COVID alone is going to have a transgenerational effect, particularly on those that are already marginalized and oppressed. And so we have to be really on the front lines. We are the invisible frontliners, right? As mental health professionals, we may not be in the hospital, we may not be right there in the operating room, but invisibly we are there to help people deal with some of the issues as the mental health is demands and needs increase.
Yeah, that makes so much sense to me, what you just said, especially since, we have so much data from the 20th century about how trauma and stressors, especially social trauma and stressors, have shaped the mental health needs of people for many generations. Like we saw things, social stressors like higher divorce rates and how that affected a whole generation. The first wave of divorced kids in America, at that number was in the 20th century. We saw latchkey kids was a whole issue, and how that was something that triggered a lot of social anxiety amongst children and built a whole generation with different mindsets. So the fact that we're going through COVID-19 and there are going to be the children who are growing up in houses with the increased drug use and with the increased domestic violence are also going to create a generation of people with different mental health needs, unprecedented mental health needs, things that we could not have anticipated or things that we have not seen in the past. I'm going to move now to our last question. Lawrence, you good to go? You have to unmute.
Can you guys hear me?
Sound good, sound good. We're rocking and rolling.
Okay, yeah, I had to switch to my son's computer, so you see his name on there now.
Okay, that's all right, that's all right.
Okay.
I'm glad that it worked out and right in the nick of time. So the last question is for you. Our last question, we can still take questions in the section, but this will be our last formal question. We'll shift the conversation one last time, which is, how does physical health impact mental health? How does whether or not we take care of our physical body, how does that affect us mentally? And what are the ways that diet and exercise and other things physically impact our mental well-beings? And what can we do to stay physically healthy during this time? What are some practices, whether it's in terms of diet or exercise, or some of the things that have been mentioned like sleep and breathing fresh air? What are those things that we can do? Give the people some tools.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, 70% of diseases, and I think Brother Joshua spoke to this a little bit earlier, is the way we eat and what it's doing to our body. 70% of diseases are preventable diseases, number one. So we are eating ourselves to death, which is a huge problem because that is something we can control. Now we got to go into the history of what African Americans usually eat. And when we're talking about Africa, we're talking about nuts and berries and greens. It's not this very heavy salt, oil, meat-based diet. So again, when you're talking about heart disease and you're talking about cancers and you're talking about all these different types of disease, again, this is CDC's own report that 70% of diseases are preventable diseases. So we are truly, healthcare truly starts in our kitchen when you're talking about diet. Obviously, when you're talking about the Bible, one of the things that sticks out in the Bible for me is how many references there are to food, parables about food and gardening and the land and so all those things we got to return to. Booker T. Washington had a plan to return to the soil. We got to understand that growing our own food is so important to our health. The soil itself is a therapy. Putting your fingers in the dirt is a therapy. So that speaks to the diet part of it. That is within our control, how we eat. It doesn't mean, like we talked about earlier before the meeting started, it doesn't mean that we can't enjoy our chicken wings every once in a while or a good burger every once in a while. But to make meat a part of your breakfast, your lunch, your dinner, your snacking, it becomes overwhelming to the body, and our body just does not process that food the way that it should. So you asked me earlier, do I still do a raw diet? It is a pretty significant part of my diet still. When we think about anything that we use, cars, our credit, we always got to make sure it's good. We got to take it to the mechanic to make sure it gets a tune-up. Well, same thing with our bodies. How do we retune and re-energize our body? French fries and potato chips just doesn't cut it. A lot of this stuff is processed food. It doesn't have the nutrients our body requires to refuel and to replace ourselves. So those things become very, very important, and it should, whatever your routine is, look at as far as your diet to improve your physical side, because like you said in my bio, physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. Well, if my physical is suffering, then my spiritual is going to suffer. If my spiritual is suffering, then my mental is going to suffer. And then if all those things are struggling and I'm sitting in a classroom, I missed about half of what that teacher was saying because my body is not performing at its maximum like it should be because I'm not eating right. As far as it pertains to exercise, now I don't know if you guys have heard a lot of this. A lot of it is a little bit more recent research. However, exercise, at least of what they found with kids, is that you can replace classroom time and therapy time and have kids exercise, and they will still develop at the same rate as if they were sitting in a classroom. So exercise is essential to rebuilding and regrowing neurons that stress and trauma has damaged. During this time, I noticed with the increase, I noticed with the increased stress with the George Floyd killing, and for me, it's a string of events. It's a chronic string of events. This is not an individualized, compartmentalized thing. This is not a one-time thing and we move on. This is a chronic stress. But I find myself leaving my house at 11 o'clock at night and going for a 2-hour walk. This is my way of coping, as well as adding the exercise piece. So it's really being able to increase that serotonin through exercise, releasing those happy chemicals in our body so we can have that balance. And those type of things, when we add to our daily routine, if you are somebody that's not used to exercising, I train kids in basketball almost daily. So it's a little bit easier for me to start a regimen of 4 to 5 times a week. But if you have not been exercising, and this is something like I want to add to my regimen because I do want to improve my health, if you've not exercised for a long time, you know, you might want to start 1 to 2 times a week or 2 to 3 times a week as a start. And this could be something like just walking. Don't go to a gym where there's a whole bunch of basketball players and you're being shamed out of the workout. You know, don't do that. You know, do something simple at home. There's a lot of resources on YouTube. Tabata workouts are really good for cardio. You know, get yourself breathing. Exercise is what we consider a tension reducer and a stress reducer. Again, it's because you're releasing all those good chemicals in your body to get balance here. So exercise almost becomes essential. Unfortunately for us, we have computers and all those things, so we're sitting in front of our computers a lot. But if you imagine before all this stuff was happening, you know, people were going for long walks. You know, Jesus was a carpenter. You know, so we were always physically active. You know, we had to go get our food. We were hunter and gatherers. We were building our communities. You know, men within the community would become soldiers. So that was always part of the training. Well, now some of that stuff, and even in our schools, they're removing PE. So PE is every other day now. You know, so it's one of those things where you don't even get the daily exercise that you need. So you have kids sitting in classroom for 8 hours and it's like, where's the physical activity? Well, that's probably also why you're seeing the behaviors, because so much of that stuff is, you know, you're pent up and you got all this energy and it's like, okay, I'm tired of math. I want to go tear something up. I want to flip, you know, I want to do something. So, but as it speaks to this time when you're also talking exercise and eating healthy, you're also talking about building the immune system. So when you're talking about a virus like COVID, if you're exercising and you're building your immune system, Dr. Sebi is a resource that I've used a lot in my studies. Dr. Sebi was a nutritionalist, African-American male, who really kind of introduced me to the idea of healing yourself through food. He's on record for beating cancer and STDs and all this stuff through a food-based diet. There's also a lot of resources on Netflix about how you can use food to heal yourself. That, along with exercise and keeping your blood, sorry, I have something popped up on my screen, but keeping your blood pumping like it should be, you know, you're exercising and you're building your immune system. So all of those things can help you fight off disease and viruses a little bit better, but couple that with your eating habits, and you can really restore your mental health just through exercise and how you eat. The icing on the cake is to actually then sit down with somebody and talk about, you know, you don't always have to sit down with somebody when you have problems, right? You can also sit down with someone when you need confirmation of just, yeah, I've made these strides, and you just need a high five or a pat on the back. You know, it's just, yeah, what you're doing is, you know, let's stick to that routine. You know, what we consider a sustainability plan. What did you add to your routine that helped or improved you in mental health wise? So someone says, well, I added exercise, man, I cut out meat every other day and I'm feeling great. Well, your sustainability plan would be maintain that. And let's see if your mental health also improves over time. So that is, to me, is I mean, when you're talking about improving mental health, if you start with exercise and food, that's going to take you a long, long way. When you're talking about just some ideas for exercise, again, with COVID and gyms not being open now, you go to the internet and find some exercise you can do in your house. One of the things that I encourage people to do, like I'll give them an exercise, hey, do 100 push-ups today. Some people might be overwhelmed by the idea of 100 push-ups, but when I break it down, oh, do 10 when you wake up in the morning. An hour or so later, do another 10. Maybe at lunchtime, do 10. After dinner, do 10. You know, now all of a sudden you're at 50, 60. Well, by the time you go to bed, you would have got that 100 push-ups done, and that's just as effective as knocking it down like the soldier who can do 100 at one sitting. Same thing with squats. So there's a lot of things that we can do in our home that can get us started. It doesn't mean you got to start a membership right away. It doesn't mean you got to go bench 150 pounds right away. Said for me, it's just go in the evening. The sunset, it's a little cooler, and I'll take an hour, hour and a half walk or a bike ride. Just including some of those things in the regimen would be one.
Wow, that was great. You touched so many different angles. Thank you so much. Is there anyone else who wanted to either piggyback or off something that he said, or put something in conversation, or try and answer the question maybe from another angle about physical health and its impact on our mental health?
Yeah, I had some thoughts, and I was thinking about some of our more seasoned and wise folk in our audience, and folk that have been walking the earth and knowing what's going on for a while now, and their bodies aren't moving like they used to. I know that sometimes there can be some fear to engage in physical activity because of pain, chronic pain, or injuries, or maybe compromised immune systems, or we're already dealing with sicknesses or dealing with different things, and the thought of doing exercise is daunting, and it's scary. It's like, oh, I don't know about all that. You should have caught me a couple years earlier. And I think for those folk in our audience, I think I'd like to talk a little bit just about some of the myths around pain and exercise. For most folk in older age brackets, pain is actually worsened by living sedentary and being still. And so sometimes we're afraid we're going to make our pain worse if we engage in activity. And so we don't. And that in turn actually makes it harder for us. It makes our pain worse. And so if we don't have to do a whole lot of fancy exercises. You don't have to do everything, but if you can do a little bit of walking, if you can sit outside, get some sunlight, do some breathing, take deep breaths if you can, walk around your house or your apartment or wherever you're living, walk around it a couple times, walk up and down the street. Or if you can't go outside, go towards the window, get some sunlight, if you're in a house with stairs, walk up and down the stairs, stretch. If you're not able to walk a whole lot, you can stretch. But there's different things that we can do to kind of really, we want to get the blood moving. Like my brother was saying, if we can get blood flowing through our bodies, that blood is, that flow is what can really get our muscles strengthened, and in turn that pain can be reduced, and then we can actually be equipped to do even more than we were doing before. And so now we might be able to walk a little bit further than we were doing, and not get as tired. So I just want to encourage those of y'all in the audience that are older, you can also, there's work for you to do too. And nutrition wise, I won't give a whole lot of suggestions with nutrition. I know everyone has a different body and different conditions, but I think talking with our doctors and doing your research on what exactly is consistent with whatever medications you're taking. I know some medications don't allow you to have certain foods, and so if we're taking our medications as prescribed and we're sticking with what our doctors are telling us, in addition to exercise or physical activity, in addition to changing the way that we're eating, I think that we can really see improvements in our quality of life. So, yeah.
And if I could piggyback off what Brother Josh just said, is, all of this begins with what Dr. Sonia spoke about earlier, which is this idea of what is the purpose of exercising and mental health in this first place. And that's, we have to have a purpose of why we're doing this. And it is a self-care or being at our best. And I feel like that's what our community needs right now. It needs us to be at our best. And that's And it's hard to be at our best if we're not physically strong. We used to have a statement, strong mind, strong body, body, strong mind. If you go through those physical activities, and I appreciated Brother Josh on how you spoke to the elderly folks, because that is something that I ignored. That is important, and that's, yeah, a little bit of stretching goes a long way. You might just want to stretch the hamstrings out, so it takes the pain out of your lower back. You know, everything is connected to everything is connected to everything. So, absolutely. So, but yeah, I mean, the purpose here is our community needs us, but it's just more than our community. America needs us, and that's where it's like America really needs some leadership, and it's like Tupac said, we're the last ones left.
That's true. You're preaching now. True. That's our job. It's our responsibility to step up in this time and help to lead. And you cannot lead unless you are healthy, unless you are taking care of your body, because it makes no sense to be leading other people while your own body is breaking down. And I also appreciate the idea that all of our health that you were sharing, Lawrence, that all of our healths are linked. So the reason why we talk about mental health is because it's linked to our physical health. And we talk about our physical health because it's linked to our emotional health. It's linked to our spiritual health as well. And God wants us to be healthy, to live life and life more abundantly. And all of these things help to work together in order for us to have that life that God wants us to have. I think that our time here is done. I'm so grateful to all of you for the time that you sacrificed. You've been such a blessing to our community, and we appreciate you so much. And we also pray that God will continue to richly bless you for all that you do for the kingdom. I'm going to open up the floor one more time if anyone wants to give some last closing remarks, a quick wrap up. Nobody has to. But I just want to see if anybody wants to, one little nugget before we go, and then we're going to end our discussion. Anybody wanted to? No? All right, well, that's all right. Thank you all so much once again, and to all those who tuned in to watch, thank you as well. I pray that you are in good health, headspace, and that this has been a blessing to you. God bless you, and have a good night.
Thank you, Marcus, for putting this together, man.
Yes, sir.